Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, in the last episode, we took a look at The Lost Ones, and The Lost Ones is a spin-off of Dreams and Shadows. And since I had Of Dreams and Shadows out, I took it out from my shelf to show the box in that video. I decided to just set it up, get the game relearned and played to make a video for Of Dreams and Shadows. One question I often ask myself, and I think it is an important question to ask if you are into board games, especially if you are into curating a collection of board games like I am. And that question is, does a collection have room for mid-tier games? Or conversely, should you only play and collect the best games? And that's kind of an interesting question. So, overland adventure games like Of Dreams and Shadows are my favorite kind of game. I love these games, especially when they have a really cool fantasy theme where I can take a character or two, or maybe a party of characters, and travel a land, going from spaces to spaces, having random encounters, upgrading my characters with new skills and new abilities and new gear, having random encounters, rolling dice to do stat checks, all of those kinds of things that I love in games like Talisman and Runebound and Arkham Horror and Eldritch Horror and Something Wicked. And yeah, just Big Trouble in Little China. Just yeah, all kinds of these overland adventure games are games that I have a real fun time playing. And there are a lot of really good ones. And Of Dreams and Shadows is, in my opinion, not one of the best. I would say this game is probably C tier at best. It does a few things really well. And one of the things it does really well is the art outside of the game map. I think the game map is kind of boring looking. It might even be worse looking than the game map for Skyrim, the adventure board game. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about the art in a minute. But yeah, Of Dreams and Shadows is kind of a C tier game. But I keep it because I like these kinds of games a lot, and it does just enough right to where I kind of, I want to play it maybe once a year. And I have the space to keep it. It all fits in one box, including the expansion, which we'll talk about the expansion in a bit. I do not recommend the expansion at all. It's one of my least favorite expansions I own. And if you end up getting Of Dreams and Shadows because of this video, I do not recommend getting the expansion. But the box isn't very big. It's kind of like the old Fantasy Flight, Arkham Horror, or Eldritch Horror size box, so it doesn't take up a ton of shelf space. And when I do play it, I do have a good time. I don't think there is enough variety in the game to where it will be a game that you turn to often, but for a once a year, maybe twice a year game, it can stay in a collection and it can sit right alongside those better games. Now, there are some people who only want to play the best games, and I totally get that. I had a friend who would often ask, why am I going to play a game like this when we can play an objectively better game? And hey, I get that. But sometimes variety is the spice of life, and you just want a little bit of a change to the game that you are playing. So, Of Dreams and Shadows is kind of a prototypical overland adventure game. You are going to be taking anywhere from, I think it's 1 to 5, just 2 to 6. So 2 to 6 heroes. I don't think you could play with just one hero. You really do need at least a party of 2. When I play solo, I usually play with 4. I don't find it too difficult to manage a party of 4 in this game. When you play with odd number of heroes, you are upping the difficulty a bit because you will often add bad things to the board based on the number of heroes rounded up. And so with odd, you end up kind of an uphill battle with an odd number of heroes. And the game is kind of already an uphill battle because not only is it a overland adventure style game, but it is also very heavily a threat management style game. and you are dealing with a lot of threats. This is only the second turn here, and already the board is kind of overflowing with enemies. And in this scenario, the enemies are trying to work their way to these yellow spots, which are the capitals of this realm. And anytime an enemy enters in one of those capitals, I lose a point of willpower for my heroes. And willpower is a very precious commodity in this game because it is a thing that the heroes can spend to augment bad luck, to augment their luck. So the party of heroes I am playing as are Nora, Freya, Braum, and Anton. And just take a moment to take in this amazing art. We talked about the art when we were looking at the Lost Ones, and the art in this game is so good. Once again, the game is designed by Gordon Alford and with graphic design by Stephen Preisman and illustrations by Matt Forsyth and Simon Buckroyd. And I think the art is incredible, except for the art of the map. The map just looks so boring and dull. All of the paths are just these really kind of boring white lines. They're not even really roads on the map. The iconography on the map looks really basic and unexciting. The painting, the paint quality of the map just doesn't entice me. I'm not quite sure why the map looks as dull as it does when all of the other art just looks amazing. So each of your heroes will have a number of stats, health and willpower. Health is their HP. Again, willpower is a currency that you can spend to augment bad luck. You keep track of your health and willpower actually on these two tracks on the board with these little tokens for each of the heroes. So we have health and willpower. I'm not sure if I like this. It's okay. It does kind of give you a really quick glimpse of how well you are doing. Right now, I have lost a ton of willpower already just in the first turn of this game without actually spending any. So I'm I'm having to dig myself out from a pretty deep hole already. But they will also have might, and might is what you use when you are entering into combat. Most of the tests in this game are taken by rolling a single d6 and then adding the attribute that you are testing and then trying to meet or beat a target number. A lot of the powers in this game will allow the heroes to roll 2 dice and take the better one. Or if you're under an affliction, you might roll 2 dice and take the worst one. So tests are pretty simple. You have agility, which also dictates some things. One of the main things that agility will tell you is the turn order. Starting with the character with the highest agility, they have the most initiative. And they will go first, and then every other character will go around in clockwise order. We have insight, awareness, persuasion, and resolve. And then some characters are also spirit touched. And if you have a character who is spirit touched, they can use spells. The character will also have an affiliation, which is just kind of a flavor text here. We have a starting location, a starting resource. So Nora here starts with the hunting knife, which gives her a +1 to her might when I am taking combat challenges. She is a survivor for all tests on wild spaces, and wild spaces are these green spaces here, like the forests. Anytime I take a test, any test, that means rolling a die and adding an attribute, I get to add a +1, or I get to roll 2 dice and take the best result. So that's great. She also has a special action, which she can ambush a foe, and ambushing kind of allows you to attack without retaliation. So she has my highest agility, so she is first in the turn order. Up next, we have Freya here. Freya started with 2 gold. Freya is a raider. For all tests in combat, I get to roll an extra die and choose the best. She can also move quicker and further than any of the other heroes at a cost of 2 health. And right now, Freya has a copper crew. So she was able to test her, her persuasion. She was able to persuade this copper crew to join her. So this is a companion, and this companion will lower the cost of all weapons and armor by 1, making it easier to buy weapons and armor. And then she also purchased this repost. And this is a combat feat, and I can use this once. I can tap it to use it. And after defending, I can make an additional attack in this combat at a +1. So that's really cool. So Freya should be my crowd management character. She should be the one out there doing the most combat because she is the best at it. I also have Braum here. It is whispered that Braum was born deep in the wilds where he was blessed by an ancient spirit. Whether the tale is true or not, his exceptional attunement with spirits means he can call on them to invoke the most powerful of spells with ease. So he is spirit touched. He is my spellcaster in this party of adventurers. He is an archmage. He has immediately, I can discard any magical afflictions. Afflictions are bad things that can happen to your characters and you can attach them. There are, I believe, 3 different kinds, and magical afflictions are one of the kind of affliction. And then while on any space, I can test my insight. And if I test that insight, I can acquire 1 spell card that is available. So he can find spells out in the wild and purchase them. And right now, I have a familiar, and the familiar will allow him to find better spells as well. And I have a spell called Spirits of Rage, which will give me all of my champions on the same space a +1 to their might. So he can help augment combat for other characters. And then finally, we have Anton here, and he's like an adventurer. He is an explorer for all tests on hollows spaces, and hollows are these red spaces. And the red spaces are kind of like the underground dungeons. And the red spaces are actually connected by these dotted lines. So these dotted lines kind of represent underground passages that connect places on the map. So when you want to travel a long distance, sometimes going to the dungeons and traveling along these hidden underground paths is the best way. And so for all tests in hollow spaces, I can roll an extra die and choose the highest. So he wants to be kind of down underground, exploring and taking care of that stuff. And then while he is on a hollow space, I can actually test my awareness at a 7. And if I pass that, I can take a relic card from the hand or that is available. Let's talk about the assets now, the resources, or these are assets. So these are all of the things that you can buy during the game. And these are different spells. Relics you can't buy, but you can find if you have a power like Anton's. But these are spells and combat abilities and armor and weapons. And the hand is a group of 5 cards that are available. And anytime you enter one of the capitals, one of the yellow spaces, or one of the realm spaces, which are these blue spaces, then you have a chance of obtaining one of the items from the hand. Right now, I have a Moon Silver Axe. There is a combat feat called Onslaught that is available. And there are 3 spells. Again, just look at this art. My God, these cards are just gorgeous. We have Warding, Heal, and Ambush. Or Banish, I should say. So those are the things that are available to me when you take a action to buy a resource or to obtain an asset, I should say. You can also recycle some of those cards. You can cycle up to 2 out to bring more in. But here are some of the other assets. We have a Cleave, which is a combat feat, Dispel, Dream, Leather Armor, Cleave again, Heal. We can hire some knights as companions. We have a Goblet of Life. Banish again, a sword and a shield, flanking, a hollowed blade, a longbow, hunters, a spirit totem, plate armor, more leather armor. So yeah, all kinds of great assets to buy. These are super cool. At the beginning of the game, you're going to choose a foe to face off and against, and that foe will dictate the scenario. In this particular game, I am playing against Auron. And Auron is kind of like this king of the undead. And I'm having to deal with a whole bunch of undead as they are rising from their graves and marching towards the cities, trying to take over the different capitals of this world. Now, the game is split into 2 acts. We have Act 1, and then you'll flip that over into Act 2. Each act has 5 rounds that you take. And at the end of the 5th round of Act 1, you will flip the card over, and then that main boss, that big bad, will come onto the map. And then in Act 2, you have to defeat him. So in Act 1, you are moving around trying to solve quests. You are trying to upgrade your character with new spells and equipment and powers. Take care of the minions to boost your chances of killing the big bad in Act 2. And if you do that by the end of Act 2, you win. If your characters die during Act 1, they kind of retire, and then a player can bring out a new character If a character dies in Act 2, that character is just out. So again, that is kind of like Arkham Horror or Eldritch Horror 2, I believe, where if an investigator dies, you can bring a new investigator in to continue to play. But as soon as the final conflict starts, then it's player elimination. Now, each of the bad guys, each of the bosses will have a deck of 12 quest cards. And throughout the game, you will seed these quest tokens randomly. All of Arwen's quests take place in the Hollow. So he's kind of, he's the Lord of the Undead. So he's underground in the dungeons. And at certain times, you will place these quest tokens out on the board. And during the scenario phase, when one of your characters is on one of those quest tokens, they can draw randomly one of these quest cards. And these quest cards will usually give you, it's a kind of a more complex narrative encounter dealing with that big bad. And in order to attack Arwen, a hero has to have a quest token in their possession in order to do damage to Arwen. So it is very important for each of the characters in your party to at least complete one quest. Let's take a look at a quest here. And I think the writing is pretty good in this game. That's another thing that the game does pretty well. And this is called The Prison. And it is nice that these quest cards are quite big and chunky, so they can put a lot of text without it being super tiny. Okay, so this is called The Prison. So you approach the tomb and notice that the outside is barred with a heavy stone door at the front. Scrawling on the walls has mostly faded to the point of being illegible, but you can make out words of warning to stay away. The front door looks to have been forced open, and you decide to investigate deeper within the burial chamber. Test your, awareness. Let's say Braum was facing off against this quest here, so he would have to test awareness of a 7. Braum has an awareness of 3, so we will roll that, and 3, 5 is 8. Okay, so we succeeded. You avoid several traps and enter the inner sanctum. And then we go down to here. A stone sarcophagus covered in elaborate etchings is in the middle of a circular chamber. You notice that its lid is ajar. As the darkness retreats from the light of your torch, you see the mutilated corpses of several people that look to be an expedition crew. They have been affixed upright along the back walls, their faces frozen in a look of horror. You see the terror set in their eyes, and the urge to escape nearly overcomes your senses. I need to test resolve of 8. Ooh, that's tough. Braum's resolve is 3. And, lucky, 5 plus 3 is 8. We succeed. Trembling as you approach the sarcophagus, you force the lid completely open and peer within. A shadowy rune is placed inside. Gain 1 quest token. If there is a relic in the hand, so if there is a relic available, you may equip it. So that's pretty cool. That's a nice thematic quest associated with Arwen, the king of the undead, in these dungeons. Then depending on if you win against Arwen or if you lose, each of the bosses also has an ending card, which will spell your victory or your defeat. There are also other heroes available. So the other heroes we have are Tamlin, Selene, Natasha, Hadron, and Morgan. And there are also other bosses. Actually, sorry, back up. Morgan is she's not a hero. She's not a champion. She's actually one of the bosses. So the bosses will have Morgan, and then she has all her quest cards, and then her victory and defeat cards. And then we have the dragon and all of its quest cards and its story ending cards. Now, the expansion adds a 3rd and 4th act. And the expansion, I completely dislike this expansion because all it does is extend the time of the game without adding a lot of variety. As a matter of fact, it kind of takes away some variety because the expansion to play Acts 3 and 4, it recommends that you only face off against the dragon. So it kind of limits what you have access to in your base game without adding a lot to the base game. And it just kind of makes the game take twice as long because it adds an Act 3 and an Act 4 to the game. And I don't think this game is good enough for that extra length. And so I never play with the expansion scenario, but with the expansion scenario, you will get your Act 3 and 4 card. You will get all of your quests for Act 3 and 4, and you will also get some upgraded heroes. because the tests for Acts 3 and 4 are a little more powerful or a little stronger, a little more difficult, I should say. And so you replace your level 1 hero card with the upgraded champion card to continue into Acts 3 and 4. I just don't think it's a very good way to do an expansion. The expansion does add quite a few assets or quite a few cards that you can buy from your store, and those can all be mixed in. So I do like doing that. And with each of the big bads, with each of the bosses, each one of them will also have their own deck of foes, their own deck of minions. Right now, out on the board, I have the Death Cultists, the Undead Corpses, the Black Magi, and the Undead Horde. And those are all out on the board right now. In the reserves against Arwen, we also have the Wraiths, we have the Vampire Maiden, and the Fallen Knight. And then each of the big bads, each of the bosses will also have a few epic foes. And for Arwen, we have the Undead Titan. God, that guy looks so great. So does this guy, the Koski, and Katarina. So again, all of these undead themed enemies there. So it is kind of cool that each of the enemies, each of the main bosses will have their own deck of foe cards. The Wendigo for Acts 3 and 4 also has its own deck. So we have the Flesh Eaters, the Famine, the Windstalker, Whisper, Howl, Devourer, and the Skinwalker. And then for the other foes here, we have all of these bad guys. These guys were in the Lost Ones. So Lost Ones does share some art assets with Of Dreams and Shadows, and it does share some of the lore and some of the story elements. At the end of each turn, so each turn is broken up into a number of phases. And like a game of Arkham Horror or Eldritch Horror, each player, each hero does each phase, and then you move on to the next phase. So everybody will take their actions, and then everybody will do combat, and then everybody will have a scenario. And during the scenario phase, depending on if you have a quest, you will draw one of those quest cards, or you will draw a card from one of these decks, depending on where you are. So if you are in the wilds, you will have a random adventure in the wilds. If you run a realm tile, you will have, or a realm space, you will have a random adventure in the realm. If you're in a hollows space, you will have a random hollow adventure. And if you are in a capital, you will have a random capital adventure. Now, I don't think there are enough of these, and in probably 2 games, you will kind of see everything that the game has to offer as far as its random elements go. The expansion adds some random events, but these are seeded in kind of a weird way. You remove all, when you get into Acts 2 or 3 and 4, you remove all of the cards associated with the spaces, and then you only play with these. And depending on whether or not you have encountered certain random encounters during Acts 1 and 2, you might have to face off against some of these different encounters in Acts 3 and 4. So once again, the expansion kind of strips away things. It adds a little bit, but it also adds quite a bit of time in between the 2 halves of the full game, where you have to reset things up. And all that really does is add more time to the game. I don't know if you could play Acts 1 and 2 with these cards mixed in. I don't know if they are too powerful for the level 1 heroes. Maybe somebody who has tried that can let me know, or maybe the next time I play, I will try to do that. But the encounters are pretty thematic, and I think that's one cool thing about them. For instance, where was this? Yeah, so Freya visited this realm up here. So this is kind of a town, a little town, and she walked into this town that was under quarantine. And so this says that you arrive in a quiet little town in the middle of the day and find the streets empty and the place eerily quiet. Walking along the main road, you notice worried eyes peeking down at you from the upper floor windows of closed shops. As you enter the main town square, you spot a large wagon loaded with corpses. A few bodies are also on the ground, covered in white sheets. A flaxen-haired woman is examining them. Noticing your presence, she introduces herself as a magi from the White Rose. She is studying a mysterious illness that has claimed over a dozen lives in this town. And I had to test my insight against a score of 7, and she failed. And so it says that you leave the Magi to her work and continue on your way. A few days later, you hear about the town's dead rising in the night and butchering everyone, lose 1 willpower, and place an undead horde on this space. So that was a real kind of serendipitous moment where this random encounter matched up with the boss I was fighting, this Lord of the Undead. This undead horde appeared in this town because the dead were rising from this plague. They were only 1 space away from a capital, and at the end of that turn, they moved into that capital. And because of the scenario I am playing, I had to lower all of my characters' willpower. So that was a real kind of interesting chain of events there. And this game does create those kinds of situations, those snowballing effects that are really tightly scripted from random elements. And I do like that. At the end of each round, you will also draw a event card, and most of them are really bad, like the one I drew at the end of my first turn here, All Hope is Lost. Each champion loses 1 willpower or 2 willpowers if they have an affliction. So that's really bad. And there are quite a few events. The expansion also does add 5 events, and I keep them mixed in just to add some more variety for when I am playing. But once again, you can see the incredible art on these cards. Man, these cards are just gorgeous. I love them so much. I think the only thing we haven't taken a look at yet are the afflictions. And so these are bad things that will happen to your characters. And each one of these will add some kind of negative effect that you will have to deal with. You can be wounded or cursed, possessed. You can have an addiction. You can become entranced. You can be inflicted with madness. So all kinds of bad, negative things can happen to your heroes while you are playing this game. So yeah, overall, I think Of Dreams and Shadows is a pretty good game. It is not A tier. It's definitely not S tier. I wouldn't even say it's a B tier overland adventure game. It is solidly a mid tier, solidly a C tier adventure game. And it just depends on whether or not you have the patience or you have the room, you have the expendable income to have this kind of game in your collection. I happen to like it just enough to keep it and just enough to pull it out maybe once a year and play it. And I usually end up having a pretty good time. It's not the game that I would turn to when I want to play this kind of game. I would much rather play Pauper's Ladder, Runebound 2nd edition, Runebound 3rd edition. I would rather play A Touch of Evil. I would rather play Arkham Horror 2nd edition or Eldritch Horror. There are many, many more games like this that I would rather play, but I like this just enough to keep it. When I play it, I do end up having a really solid thematic time. I think it creates interesting stories on the table. I think the theme is very tightly woven into everything. And sometimes it gets really overwhelming with all the bad things that are happening. And if you like threat management style adventure games, this is a pretty good one. And I think I could recommend it if the price is right. On Amazon, it usually goes for about $60. I think that's a little too high. If you can find a used copy for $40 or so, I say pick it up and give it a try. And I think you can safely ignore the expansion. I don't think the expansion adds enough. It actually doesn't really add anything to the base game to make it more fun. And it just extends the length of the game. And so I just never play with that expansion. One thing the expansion does have is an amazing box cover. This piece of art here. God dang, that is good art. I wish the expansion was better because when I look at this, I'm like, man, I want to play this Monster Within expansion. It's just too bad that the expansion just doesn't really offer up enough fun to introduce it to the table, at least not for me. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Of Dreams and Shadows. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.